All right, let's dive in, shall we? Today we're tackling Edvard Munch, specifically The Scream. You guys sent in a ton on this one, so we know you're ready to go deeper than just, oh, that screaming painting. It's iconic, no doubt. But what turned this thing into such a cultural phenomenon?
And what a question to unpack, right? I mean, the scream really gets under your skin, doesn't it? It's more than just a picture. It's a whole feeling, one that seems to speak to people across time, you know? Like, it touches on something universal about being human.
Oh, absolutely. Even just reading Munch's own words about what inspired it kind of sends chills down your spine. In that Wikipedia excerpt, he talks about like walking at sunset and the sky being blood red, and then this infinite scream passing through nature, intense. But it also makes you wonder, was he being literal?
It's the question that's haunted art historians forever. I mean, on the one hand, some people latch onto real events from that time. Like there was that Krakatoa eruption, right? That volcanic ash really messed with the sky's colors globally. And in fact, that PDF, the Scream one, even mentions that some researchers think Munch could have actually seen those after effects himself.
So he might have seen a real-life blood-red sky, and that got the wheels turning. But then again, didn't Wikipedia also say his sister was in an asylum nearby back then? Could have been more of a psychological thing, maybe?
See, exactly. And that's where it gets juicy. Because that PDF also highlights how much Munch was into expressing internal states through his art. So was it a literal sky? A reflection of his turmoil? Or maybe both? That ambiguity is kind of baked into what makes the painting so powerful.
Hold on, so you're saying it could be both literal and symbolic at the same time? Okay, my mind's a little blown. But it makes sense, right? Like, yeah, there might be a real-world reason for the sky. But the real impact comes from how it makes us feel. All that unease, the lines going haywire, nothing solid. Almost like we're the ones about to scream, not just the figure.
Nailed it. And trust me, Munch didn't just accidentally stumble onto that effect. If you look at that PDF, it talks about how deliberately he uses color and linol to jack up that anxious feeling. Don't forget, this was the late 1800s. Munch and those artists were all about symbolism, using visual metaphors to get across bigger ideas.
Okay, yeah, symbolism, I've heard the term. But can you give me an example? How does that actually play out in the Scream?
Totally. Think about those wavy lines in the background. They're not just a landscape, they're reflecting the figure's inner state, too. Like being totally overwhelmed, even the figure's face, all stretched out, almost skull-like. That's symbolic, man. Representing this existential dread, which was a pretty new idea in art and philosophy back then.
Existential dread. Now we're cooking. But for those of us who didn't, live in the philosophy section of the library, can we break that down a bit?
Of course. Basically, existentialism is all about those heavy-hitter questions. Meaning of life, our purpose when the universe is so vast and kind of indifferent. It's about feeling alone in the face of existence, basically. And if you look at the Scream, you can practically feel those questions coming off the canvas, can't you?
It's funny you should say that, because even if someone's never heard the word existentialism, they still know the Scream, It's Home Alone, classic Kevin. And don't get me started on the Scream movies. Ghostface owes Munch royalties, I'm telling you.
That's
on
it.
T-shirts, mugs, it's everywhere.
It's wild how the Scream went from art world to full-blown meme, almost like it's detached from what it originally meant. Why do you think that happened? What makes something catch on like that?
That's the million-dollar question. Part of it's got to be how recognizable it is, right? Even if art history is not your thing, you know that face. But I think you're onto something with it being tied to this. Universal feeling.
Exactly. It's more than an image. It's like shorthand for anxiety, fear, that feeling of being totally swamped by, well, life.
And maybe that's why it hits even harder now than it did back in Munch's day. I mean, the late 1800s weren't a picnic. But the world's gotten a tad louder since then, wouldn't you say?
100%. And that's where Munch's genius comes in. He captured a feeling that's personal to him, sure, but it breaks free of its time and place, that existential angst. We've all been there. But why is this image, out of all the art about this stuff, why did this become the visual for modern anxiety?
Ooh, now there's the real head scratcher. And speaking of head scratchers, didn't one of the Scream sell for like an insane amount of money?
It did. That Wikipedia article you mentioned, a pastel version went for almost $120 million.
You're kidding. That's more than some countries. But it makes you wonder, what is it about that specific version that made someone drop $120 million? Is it just the art market doing its thing, or is there something about that Scream that really spoke to them?
Interesting thought, right? And it speaks to how powerful this image still is. Plus, Munch didn't just paint it once and call it a day either. He did multiple versions, 2 paintings, 2 pastels, and then who knows how many lithographs. He kept coming back to this image throughout his career.
You know, it's funny. I can't get over that Munch made multiple screams. It wasn't a one and done. He kept going back to it. Why do you think that was? Like, what's the impulse there?
Maybe he was chasing a feeling, trying to get it just right, or each version is like, it's a slightly different shade of that anxiety. We know Munch had his demons, right? That PDS mentions his mental health struggles, family stuff, losing his mom and sister young, difficult relationships. Maybe the scream wasn't one scream, but echoes of this internal world he was dealing with.
Man, that's kind of sad when you put it like that. Each one a piece of this bigger struggle. But there's also something about him doing it over and over that's relatable, isn't there? Like, we've all had those anxieties that just keep coming back no matter how much you think you've dealt with them.
For sure. And that's why the scream still matters today. It's not just some 19th century thing, you know. Munch hit on something core to being human, feeling lost, facing how huge everything is and how small we are. Those questions never go away, no matter what time period you're in.
It's like by making his own personal hang-ups into art, he accidentally created this whole language for something everyone feels.
Exactly. That's why it's a touchstone. We connect to that anxiety, that uncertainty, in a way that's both deeply personal, and we know others get it too. We see ourselves in that screaming figure, even if our lives were totally different from Munch's.
It's like permission to feel those things, you know? Like, hey, even back then people were going through it. And it wasn't just him. That PDF mentioned existentialism being huge then, right? Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Sartre, all wrestling with these big ideas. But philosophy can be kind of tough to get through, you know? It takes effort. Munch just throws it right in your face with the scream. No dictionary needed. You just get it.
Exactly. It's immediate. Cuts through all the noise, both literally and figuratively, I'd say.
Speaking of noise, that Wikipedia article had a really cool theory about the scream itself. Apparently, some people think the figure isn't screaming outward, but covering their ears to block something out.
Right. Isn't that interesting? And it totally fits with how Munch described it himself. Remember, the infinite scream passing through nature. Maybe he wasn't just painting the urge to scream, but being overwhelmed by the noise of everything around him.
So instead of being the one screaming, he's trying to find a little peace in all the chaos.
Exactly. Adds a whole other level, right? It's less about surrendering to your anxiety and more about dealing with it. Finding some quiet in the middle of a storm.
Wow, that's actually really powerful when you think about it that way. And it makes you realize how much the scream gets reinterpreted over time.
Totally. It's a mirror, in a way. Shows us our own anxieties back at us, parodied, copied, reimagined. And each version says something about how we're dealing with the big questions at the time.
Which maybe explains why he made multiple versions. It wasn't just repeating himself. Each one's him tackling the idea in a new way. Different techniques, different mediums.
For sure. Like, think about how some versions, especially that $120 million pastel, they're way brighter than others.
Yeah. You wouldn't think the scream equals bright colors, but some are. What's that about? Softening the mood or?
Who knows? That's for the art historians to fight over. But it makes you think, right? Maybe those bright colors don't make it less anxious, they actually make it more so. Like, there's this clash between happy colors and this figure frozen in a scream. Don't you think that adds to the unease?
Totally. Like, even when he's using a lighter touch, there's still this underlying something. And maybe that's the whole point. Anxiety isn't always this big dramatic thing, right? Sometimes it's the quiet moments, the supposedly good ones, that really get to you.
Exactly. The scream reminds us that things aren't always as they seem. And sometimes the biggest truths are hiding right in front of us.
It's like one of those magic eye pictures, you know? Stare long enough, you see something new each time. That's the scream for you. Think you've got it figured out? Bam! New detail, new theory. Got to rethink the whole thing.
And isn't that what makes art great? When it keeps the conversation going, makes you question things, even over 100 years later.
For real. Speaking of conversations, that Wikipedia article, it called The Scream, the Mona Lisa of Our Time. Bold statement. What do you think about that comparison?
It's definitely a choice. But like any good comparison, it makes you think about what's alike and what's different. So both are crazy famous, both kind of mysterious, both grab people's attention even after centuries. But the scream, it doesn't do subtle, does it? Not like Mona Lisa's little smirk. This is raw emotion right there on the surface.
Right. So if the scream really is our Mona Lisa, what's that say about us, huh?
Ooh, now we're getting philosophical.
Right. Are we just more anxious now, more open about our messy insides than folks back then? Or do we just have better taste in art? I'm kidding. Mostly.
Although, maybe there's some truth to that. Art shows us what a culture's thinking about, right? And the scream, yeah, it's dark, but it's also honest. Like, Facing up to the tough parts of being human.
Exactly. Munch could have painted something pretty easy to swallow. But nope, he gave us this. Pure, unfiltered, holy crap energy. And it worked. People back then felt it, we feel it now.
And maybe that's because deep down, we get it. That screaming figure, it's a bit of all of us. Feeling vulnerable, scared of the unknown. Not fun stuff, but it's part of the deal, right? Part of being alive.
And maybe, by facing that stuff, even the scary parts, by letting it OUT, maybe that helps us understand it.
That's a hopeful way to see the scream, isn't it? Not just our anxieties on a canvas, but this reminder that we're not alone in having anxieties. Like, being vulnerable connects us even.
Whoa. Okay, did
Yeah.
not expect to get all deep like that, but I am here for it. So to everyone listening, if you're feeling a little existentially overwhelmed today, you're not alone.
Yeah.
And hey, maybe go find a print of this scream. Either it'll make you feel better, or at least you'll know someone else gets it.
A fittingly mysterious end to our little arc adventure, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Huge thanks to you and to everyone listening for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.